Imagine, Ken 1967. A luxurious yacht rocks on the waves of the Mediterranean Sea. A French diplomat pours champagne for a charming Russian beauty in an evening dress. He does not know that in 3 hours he will give her the access codes to NATO's secret documents. And the most amazing thing, he will do it voluntarily, with a smile on his face. According to declassified data, female KGB agents carried out more than 1,000 successful operations around the world. They were called swallows. And today we will reveal the secrets of the most classified seduction school in intelligence history. How did ordinary Soviet girls become weapons of the Cold War? What price did they pay for success, and why could even experienced Western counterintelligence officers not resist them? Fasten your seatbelts. This story will change your view of female power and human psychology. Moscow 1962. Gray building on city's outskirts. From the outside, an ordinary professional development institute. Inside, the most secret KGB school. Imagine a young woman, a recent philology student. She thought she was going to an interview at the Ministry of Culture. But it turned out to be a room where a gray-haired colonel asked strange questions. Are you ready to sacrifice personal happiness for the motherland? Can you make a man fall in love with you even if you despise him? Only 30 were selected out of 1,000 applicants. The criteria, not just beauty. The main things: intelligence, psychological resilience, and a special talent. The talent to become the woman a man wants to see. The training program was striking in its variety. In the morning, lectures on the psychology of male behavior from the country's best experts. Professor Kamenev, they say, could tell a man's complexes just by his walk. In the afternoon, acting skills. In the evening, studying the etiquette of high society, the wine lists of Europe's best restaurants, the latest trends in Western fashion. But the most interesting happened during practical classes. The cadets practiced dozens of scenarios: chance encounters in a museum, a broken car on a blocked road, a lost earring in a theater foyer. Every gesture, every glance was rehearsed to the point of automation. The instructors taught the main rule. You do not seduce the man. You create the conditions so that he thinks he is seducing you. Brilliant, isn't it? And do you know what was the hardest thing in the training? Learning to switch off emotions. One of the graduates admitted many years later. We were taught to look at men as mechanisms, find the right button, and the mechanism will work as needed. But that was only the tip of the iceberg, because the real trials began in the second year of training. Did you know that the KGB had an entire classification of seducer agents? Swallows, women. Sparrows, men, yes, they trained them too, but today we are talking about the fair sex. Swallows were divided into categories. Elite golden swallows worked with high-ranking diplomats and scientists. Silver ones, with military attaches and businessmen. And there were also dust swallows for one-off operations. Take Operation Venus, 1971. According to declassified documents, a young employee of the Academy of Sciences, Tatiana K., in just 2 months extracted from an American nuclear physicist formulas that Soviet scientists had been struggling with for 3 years. How did she do it? Chance meetings at a scientific conference in Vienna, dropped papers, helping a flustered Russian beauty, coffee during a break, a conversation about poetry. It turned out they both loved Robert Frost. What a coincidence. Dinner, a walk through Vienna at night, and a week later the enamored American was whispering not only words of love but also the secret data of his research into her ear. The most amazing thing, many victims, even after exposure, refused to believe that their love had been an operation. One British diplomat, who spent 5 years in a Soviet prison, kept a photograph of his Natasha until the end of his life and insisted, "She truly loved me, it was just circumstances." It is believed that the most successful swallow was a certain Galina M., who in her career recruited 14 high-ranking foreigners. Her secret: she never played the same role twice. For a French banker, a refined aristocrat; for an American soldier, a simple Russian girl dreaming of freedom. For a German industrialist, a businesswoman with an iron grip. Do you know what's the creepiest part? According to former employees, each swallow had a psychologist handler who, after each mission, conducted special sessions. Why? Well, we will talk about that a bit later. Because first I will tell you the story of one girl who became a legend of Soviet intelligence. 1965. Moscow University. A professor of Romance philology notices a new student in a lecture. Ludmila, a modest girl from Voronezh, an honors student, speaks 4 languages. 6 months later, it was this professor, a secret operative of the KGB First Chief Directorate, who recommended her for special work. Ludmila was 21 when she first crossed the threshold of the secret school. Psychologists noted an IQ of 142, empathy, the highest, an exceptional gift for transformation, phenomenal, the perfect candidate. The first mission. Paris 1968. The target, assistant to the U.S. military attaché, with access to NATO's plans in Southeast Asia. Cover. Daughter of white émigrés working in an antique shop in Montmartre. 3 months of preparation. Studying the history of Russian emigration, antiques trade, Parisian realities down to the bus schedules. The operation began with a trifle. A rainy evening, a broken heel near Notre Dame, a gallant American with an umbrella. Then, like in a movie. Gratitude, coffee, a conversation about Hemingway. She knew he was a fan of the old man. A month later, the first date. He was ready to quit his job for her and take her to America. Ludmila obtained documents that, according to some sources, helped prevent a major U.S. military operation in Vietnam. The American never learned the truth. Moreover, he searched for his Marie, her Paris alias, for another 10 years. But Ludmila's most dramatic operation took place in 1972 in West Berlin. Target, head of counterintelligence at BND. A German known for his suspicion and misogyny after a bitter divorce. It seemed like an impossible mission. Ludmila took an unconventional approach. Instead of seduction, she became his psychologist. A chance meeting in a park where he was feeding ducks. She, a lonely woman also going through a divorce. No flirting, only understanding. 3 months of friendship, conversations about life, walks together. And one day, sitting on a bench by the lake, this man, a professional counterintelligence officer, began telling his friend about problems at work, about a mole in the Soviet residency they had identified, about the plans for the operation to capture him. You might think this is a fairy tale, but in 2010 in German archives they found the diary of that very BND officer. The last entry. She disappeared as suddenly as she appeared. Sometimes it seems to me that I made her up. The perfect woman who knew how to listen. And what happened to Ludmila herself? That's separate. But first, let's figure out what psychological techniques made such women almost unbeatable. Do you know what was written in the secret KGB textbook, Psychology of Recruitment, Chapter 7? Every person is a safe. You just need to find the right combination. And Soviet psychologists created an entire science of breaking into human souls. Professor Viktor Lebedev, a legend of Soviet psychology, developed the method of emotional resonance. The essence is brilliantly simple. An agent must become a mirror of the target's subconscious desires. Give the lonely the illusion of family, to an unrecognized genius, an admiring listener, to one tired of responsibility, the feeling of carefreeness. Declassified documents describe the technique of gradual involvement. The first stage, creating comfort. The agent copies the target's microgestures, speech tempo, even breathing rate. The subconscious perceives them as one of their own. The second stage, forming dependence. Sudden disappearances, returns, emotional swings. The brain begins producing dopamine only in the agent's presence. The third stage, however, is so sophisticated that even now psychologists argue about the ethics of such methods. One graduate of the special school recalled, "We were taught to read people like books. Compressed lips when smiling. Hiding resentment toward mother. Constantly adjusting a watch. Anxiety about lost time. Looks up to the left while speaking. constructing a lie. But the most dangerous weapon was the emotional anchor technique. At the moment of maximum trust, the agent created a unique link, the scent of perfume, a Chopin melody, a gesture. Later it was enough to reproduce that anchor, and the person would again sink into a state of absolute openness. Some victims could not rid themselves of this psychological dependence for years. There was a case in 1974. A British cryptographer working on new NATO ciphers met a Russian pianist named Anna. She always wore jasmine-scented perfume and hummed a Chopin melody. 6 months later, when counterintelligence exposed her, the cryptographer attempted suicide. In his suicide note, "I cannot live in a world without the scent of jasmine." KGB psychologists studied everything from Bowlby's attachment theory to Milgram's experiments. They knew a person was capable of anything for the illusion of love, and they used that knowledge as a weapon. But do you know what happened to the agents themselves after using these methods? They tried not to talk about it, even in classified reports. The French Riviera. Summer 1969. In the midst of the Cold War, there was an operation that the KGB later studied as a model. 3 months of preparation. 2 years of execution. Result: access to the French Foreign Ministry's correspondence with African countries for decades ahead. Michel Dupont. Name changed. 45 years old. Counselor at the French Embassy, specialist in Africa. Widower, lonely, secretly writes poetry. It was this last detail that became the key to the entire operation. Agent Margarita, codename Lily, appeared in his life like a revelation. A Russian émigré, literature teacher in Nice, refined connoisseur of Baudelaire's poetry. Their meeting, a coincidence in a bookstore. She was buying Tommy Querlin, he, Rimbaud. Their eyes met over a shelf of French symbolists. Then came meticulous work. Margarita didn't just read Dupont's poems, which the KGB had stolen from his apartment in advance. She understood them more deeply than he did. She found hidden meanings, admired the metaphors, cried over the most piercing lines. Within 1 month, Dupont was ready to give up his diplomatic career for poetry and love. Within 3, he was reading her secret telegrams from Paris to explain why he was late for a date. Within 6 months, she knew more about French policy in Africa than some ministers. The climax came unexpectedly. Dupont proposed marriage. According to the legend, Margarita was supposed to agree and continue working as the diplomat's wife. But something unforeseen happened. Message found in archives. Lily refuses marriage, requests to end the operation. Reason? Personal circumstances. What was hidden behind this wording? Only 40 years later did it become known, Margarita had truly fallen in love. A professional intelligence officer, who had completed hundreds of trainings in emotional control, could not cope with her own heart. On the night after the proposal, she confessed everything to Dupont. The ending was worthy of an ancient tragedy. Dupont did not expose her to French counterintelligence. Moreover, he helped her disappear, and kept Tommy Querlin with her notes in the margins until the end of his life. After his death in 2015, his children found a letter in his safe. "I forgave you the second you confessed, because the only lie was your legend." The love was real. Operation Line failed. But it was precisely this operation that made the KGB leadership think about what happens to a person who lives someone else's life for years, and what price is paid by those who turn love into a weapon. In the Lubyanka's secret archives, there is a folder marked Top Secret, Psychological Rehabilitation. Do you know what is in it? Stories of women who forgot how to love. Doctor of psychology Elena Voronova, who worked with agents in the 1980s, left her memoirs. They came to me empty inside. Imagine, for years pretending to feel, manipulating emotions, living in an invented persona. The psyche begins to confuse where the real self is and where the role is. The syndrome of emotional burnout in female operatives manifested especially cruelly. Inability to form sincere relationships. Panic attacks when attempting intimacy. Nightmares where the faces of their targets were all mixed together. The story of Valentina K., one of the most successful swallows of the 1970s. In 10 years of service, 8 successful operations, priceless information, state awards. And at 35? A suicide attempt. In her suicide note, I remember all their faces, I remember how they looked at me with love, and I can no longer look in the mirror. KGB psychologists tried to help, developed an entire rehabilitation program, a new identity, relocation, an attempt to start a normal life. But how do you explain gaps in your biography to a future husband? How do you learn to trust after years of total control? There are reports about a secret sanatorium near Sochi where retired swallows underwent recovery. Officially it was a holiday home for employees of foreign trade organizations, but in reality, the last attempt to return to these women the ability to feel. One of the patients recalled. The hardest part was learning to cry. With real tears, not on command. 6 months of therapy just to allow yourself that luxury, genuine emotions. But there were also those who didn't cope. Alcohol, drugs, an endless change of partners in an attempt to feel something. Or, on the contrary, complete isolation, fear of any relationships. Do you know what phrase was most often heard in psychotherapy sessions? I don't know who I really am. Women who could become anyone to complete an assignment lost their own identity. And here's the worst part, many could never rid themselves of their professional skills until the end of their lives. They would automatically analyze interlocutors, look for weaknesses, build psychological profiles, even with their own children. As one of them said, the KGB taught me to read people but never taught me how to stop doing it. Meanwhile in the West, they were not idle either, and they had their own methods of dealing with Soviet swallows. In CIA archives there is a document dated 1973. It is called Operation Venus. Failure. The first line. We underestimated Russian women. That was our main mistake. James Angleton, the legendary head of CIA counterintelligence, a man who exposed dozens of Soviet spies, admitted. We identified male illegals by their accent, manners, minor inconsistencies. But women, they didn't play the role, they became it. There are stunning memoirs by Peter Wright, an MI5 officer who hunted Soviet agents for 20 years. The chapter on swallows begins like this. If you think it's easy to spot a professional seductress, you've never met graduates of the Moscow School. Wright describes a case from 1971. A young cryptographer from the British Foreign Office, David Thornton, fell in love with a Polish artist named Anna. MI5 checked her inside and out. A perfect cover story, real paintings, exhibitions, artist friends. Only 2 years later, when Thornton had already handed over codes for the latest encryption machines, did it turn out that the entire Warsaw Bohemian Circle had been covering for one person, Anna. Do you know what impressed us the most? Wrote Wright, they can play the long game. A Western agent could pretend for 1 month, 2, 6 months. Russian women lived in their roles for years without making a single mistake. The French counterintelligence service created a special unit, the Aphrodite Group, to combat Soviet swallows. It was headed by Jean-Claude Marchand, a psychologist by training. His method was to study not the women, but the men, potential targets. Marchand developed a formula. Loneliness plus professional dissatisfaction plus suppressed ambitions equals the perfect target. By this formula, they put diplomats, scientists, and military officers under observation and waited for the appearance of a chance beauty. But even that didn't always work. In declassified NATO documents there is a case from Brussels, 1978. A colonel on the alliance staff was warned, a Soviet spy is hunting you. They showed him photos of known agents. They put him under surveillance, assigned a psychologist, and yet 6 months later the colonel fled to Moscow following a waitress from a local bistro whom no one suspected. The most remarkable admission came from Aldrich Ames, the CIA traitor. Americans think everything can be bought or taken by force. Russians know that the most valuable things people give voluntarily, for love, even if it's illusory. By the late 1970s, Western intelligence agencies had developed instructions for employees. Avoid romantic relationships with women from socialist countries, report any attempts at acquaintance, undergo regular polygraph tests. It helped. Judge for yourself, according to intelligence historians, until the very collapse of the USSR, swallows remained one of the KGB's most effective tools because no defense had been invented against professionally played love. So what happened to these women after 1991? The story of their fates is a separate drama. December 1991. The red flag is lowered from the Kremlin, and in secret apartments in Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev, women sit who suddenly found themselves out of work. Yesterday, the elite of intelligence, today, nobodies. Financial shock. Generous hard currency payments, service apartments, special food rations, all disappeared overnight. Imagine a 40-year-old woman who had spent her whole life being a French aristocrat, an American journalist, or an Italian singer. And in her work record, a blank, or librarian at the Ministry of Culture, tried to find themselves in the new Russia. Irina M., a former golden swallow, opened an etiquette school for the wives of the new rich. I taught them the same things the KGB taught me, how to conduct oneself in high society. Only now it was legal, she said in a rare interview. Others left. Ironically, women who had fought the West all their lives sought salvation there. Marina T. married a German businessman she had once tried to recruit. He learned the truth 20 years later and forgave her. He said, "You were still the most genuine woman I ever knew." Tragedies occurred. Valeria K., a legend of foreign intelligence, could not adapt. Alcohol, depression, suicide attempts. In 1995, she was found dead in a rented apartment on the outskirts of Moscow. Old photographs from operations and the Order of the Red Star were next to her. The most astonishing story is that of Lyudmila Igorchenko. Remember her? In the 2000s she suddenly appeared as the author of psychological training courses in Switzerland under a different name with the impeccable legend of a simple Soviet emigrant. Her seminars on the art of understanding cost thousands of euros. Businessmen and politicians learned from her how to read people. There is unconfirmed information that in the early 2000s the FSB tried to bring some swallows back to work. New times, new goals. Now the hunt was not for military secrets but for economic ones. But most refused. "I gave my soul to this work, literally. I don't have another one," said one of them. And some simply disappeared. They vanished just as taught. Perhaps they lived somewhere under false names, with invented biographies. Old skills are never forgotten. In 2018, in Paris, a Russian music teacher named Anna Sergeeva died. Her neighbors knew her as a sweet old lady who adored Chopin. After her death, a safe was found in her apartment, and inside were photographs from embassy receptions, a cipher notebook, and a medal for combat service. The French police never managed to establish her real name. That's the story, my friends. The story of women who turned love into a weapon and in the end became victims of that very weapon themselves. You know, studying these stories, you can't help but wonder where the line lies between duty to one's country and the right to remain human. These women were patriots, without question. They were professionals of the highest caliber. But at what cost? We live in a world where information is the main currency, and the temptation to use the oldest human instincts to obtain it has never gone away. The methods have simply become subtler, more technological. The story of the KGB's swallows is not just spy tales from the past, it's an eternal dilemma. Does the end justify the means? Can happiness be built on a foundation of lies? And what remains of a person who has lived someone else's life for years? I don't know the right answers, but I do know that behind every operation, behind every intelligent success, there was a human drama. The drama of a woman who forgot how to love. The drama of a man who, until the end of his life, could not believe in the betrayal. The drama of two people who could have been happy if not for the Cold War. And what do you think? Can love be a weapon? And if it can, Who in the end becomes the victim? The one who was deceived, or the one who deceived? Write in the comments. This topic deserves discussion. And remember, any war eventually ends, but the wounds inflicted on the human heart never heal.